I'm gonna break down how I did the Spider-Verse stylized render in Blender. So there's a new Spider-Man movie had dropped with insane amount of visual stylization. I decided to try it myself in Blender. I just loved that 2D 3D effect. Those line shapes in shadows and comic book art styles, I just loved that. So I am going to break down the full process in simple steps. So I had spent very much time in gathering as much reference as I can, mainly for the stylizations. I collected his head references, those comic styles and line shape references, and much more. Basically, my idea was to create the Spider-Man as standing on a rooftop in the middle of the scene, with the pose something like this. Maybe some futuristic sci-fi objects on his back, and some buildings in the background. And yes, also I want to put those hexagon-shaped things which are there in the movie. And finally I will lighten up this with two lights. One pinkish-purplish light from left and a cool bluish light from the right. After I satisfied with the idea, I jumped into ZBrush and started sculpting the Spider-Man. I had used the ZBrush Male Z tool to create the body. Let me tell you that this is a very brief explanation of how I created the character and set up the scene with models. If you straight away want to see how I created the shaders and render, you can see the timestamps. At this point I had no idea that I will later add the Miles Morales head as well. This stage I only assumed that I use the Spider-Man itself. As the model gets sculpted, I quickly send it to Blender, where I quickly retopo it. Let me know you, that these footages which you are looking at are post-recorded after the character creation. Because the point of this video is to show the shading and materials, not the character creation. After retopo I mark the seams from which I can generate the UVs for texturing. Then I throw the model to Substance Painter for texturing. In here, I firstly added the first layer of color, which is the deep blue color, then I painted second layer with the red color details, and finally the subtle light blue color layer. Export this color texture. I also made a mask texture, in which the lower layer, which is the deep blue layer, is black, and all the other top layers are white. It will be used later on when I will doing the materials. At this point I had decided to make the Miles Morales head as well, so sculpt that also in ZBrush, give a good topology in Blender, then UV unwrap it, throw that to Substance Painter, paint the skin colors, and also I painted those cool lines as a mask, so that I can use then separately from the skin texture. I had painted the eyes as well. The white highlights, as you can see, are also painted. Then I jumped back to Blender, select some faces for scalp, and add a hair particle system. You know this step. I had many tutorials on hair. Also don't forget the eyebrows. When everything done, it's time to rig it because otherwise our character won't be posed, so I enabled the Rigify add-on, and add the human metarig. Just align all the bones with your characters, and yes, delete all the bones which you don't need here. After aligning, click on Generate Rig, it will generate a good rig for the model. Select the body and then the rig, now hit Ctrl+P, and then parent with automatic weights. And yes, now you can pose your character. In this stage I will just putting some primitive shapes to conceptualize the scene. Just adding cubes, cylinders and circles to make the basic shapes. I had made the world color to black, and add a point light with pinkish color, with a high intensity and size, put that on his right, and add another point light with blue color with same intensity and maybe bigger in size, and put that on his left, and I also added a third point light with white color on front of it to add some light on his face as well, with very little intensity. Finally added a plane with emission shader with deep purple-like color. And just hit render, to get your first draft image. In this stage I just replaced all the primitive shapes with detailed models. Some models I had created in a separate blend file and import here and position it, and some models are from Video Copilot motion design packs. Just reshape them, adjust the size or position. I also created a hair particle system for the buildings. You can see the building models, with light on. I just desaturate the color map and inverted it and used as a mask for emission shader. I also added some volumetrics for depth. I had given it a procedural volumetric shader, and feed a good color ramp in the color socket. And yes, I had done a cloth sim for his mask. Now the part which you all are waiting for, the Spider-Verse-like shaders. First of all, disable all the layers which have background elements, to only show the Spider-Man in lighting. Now we can focus on the subject better. Select his body and add an image texture node. I am selecting the color texture that we created. I am plugging in the color texture. It looks like this. But for this shader we doesn't need the principal BSDF. Instead we need a Toon shader. This shader is very friendly when it comes to make cartoon-like shaders. So I am plugging in the color texture to the shader and shader to the output. Let's reduce the size to make the specularity sharp. And give a little amount of smoothness. Now this is our first shading group. I'm framing it by hitting Shift P and call it Toon Shader. Now it's time to add these details, as you can see in bluish color. Add a mix shader. I am adding an image texture node and import the texture. The texture looks something like this. I made that in Photoshop. Let's preview the texture. As you can see, it's wrapping on the body, which I need, but they are very big, so to increase the mapping size, add a mapping node, and then a texture coordinate node, and plug the UV to the vector of the mapping node. Now you can increase the tile size by increasing these numbers separately. But I am adding a value node here, and plug that to the scale. Now I can increase all the value together. I am leaving it at 15. As you can see, the patterns are not that straight, it has a rotation. So I will also rotate our pattern by setting the value of 45 in the Z rotation of the mapping node. Now to add this to the main shader, we have to add the principal BSDF shader. Why I am adding a principal shader and not the Toon shader? Because if you see the trailer or the shots of Spider-Man in the movie, these patterns don't just have a color, they are glossy or reflective too, and it can properly done with the principal node. So add the principal node in the bottom socket of the mix shader, and give a blue color. And now plug the pattern image texture to the factor value of the mix node. Now you can see the pattern in the suit, but it is all over the place. Let's keep these apart, and add a mix node, set it to color, place it between the connecting link of the pattern and factor value. Set the bottom color to full black. And now this factor value will work as on-off switch of the pattern. So we need something here so that it can recognizes where it have to put the pattern and where not. So here's the mask texture comes to the picture that we made in Substance Painter. Add that texture and plug that into the factor value. Now we can see the pattern is only on the black areas of the suit. Here, still little amount of pattern is visible, so I added a color ramp node to tighten up the mask. Let's see the reference again. You can see the pattern is not uniformly everywhere on the black areas. To achieve this effect, first we need to give some space. Duplicate the color mix node and add again on the connection link. Again it becomes the on-off switch. So we have to add something to this factor value. Here I am adding a node called layer weight node. Let me share what it can do. You can see it works like a Fresnel effect, or in simple words, light trap effect to the mesh. You can change it to facing also, to get much more contrast effect, and you can also change the blend values to increase or decrease the effect. It's a wonderful node to fake the light wrap on objects. Now re-plug the shader links back. Place the node here, and use its facing option. Plug that to the factor value. You might be think what the hell has changed? But wait, when increase the blend value you will see the effect. I am setting it to 0.97. Now it's looking fine. Now, this is the pattern node group, let's frame it and name it. The third and final group which is left, is to add those dot patterns, which looks very comical, but they are not all over the place, they are mostly on the edges of the objects. Add an image texture node, I am importing this dot pattern image. Let's preview the texture. As you can see, it also wraps on the object, which I don't want. The dot patterns in the movie are flat. To achieve this, we had to add the mapping node and texture coordinate node. But we will not be using generated or UV this time, we will be using camera. Now you can see they are looking flat on the object. But there's another problem with the camera option as well. When you turn the model around, there you can see some wrapping happening in the contour of the mesh. This is because the camera option shoots a ray of projection mapping to the object and wrap from the camera angle, and those things which are curved would bend the projection. So you can also use this option called window, but it not proportional to the camera distance. If you go further, you will get big dots, and when the object is near you will get small dots. Basically the texture will be like a flat image stuck on the object. It's actually helpful in some extent. But when you use camera, it may get stretched the dots, because the window option depends on the frame ratio of the camera. Because I am using a 16:9 ratio, it's squeezing the dots vertically. And yes, if you use square ratio frame, it does not squeeze the image. You can technically use the scale value separately according to the ratio, but I want to keep this non-destructive and we have to render this in any ratio we want. So I will stick to camera for now. Again, to tile the mapping, I am using value node. This image which I am using has black and white values, so I will be using its alpha channel in this material. Now I get full white dots. Now again add a principal BSDF, and plug the dots images alpha to the color socket and also to the emission socket. I want the dots to be the color of the suit, which I can manipulate later. So I am adding a color mix node here, and put the color of the suit in its bottom socket. Let me organize the nodes better. Let's put the dot texture to factor value of the color mix node. Make the top color to black. We can able to see some dots are getting to the shader, but I want some control of the contrast and brightness, so I added RGB curves here and place that on the connection link. Now I can brighten it up. So the last group is also finalized. Let's combine this also to the shader. Add a mix shader and plug both links to the mix shader. Now you can see if I set factor to 0, there will be no dots, and with the factor value to 1 there are full dots, so we have to add something to the factor input. And yes, we will again add the layer weight node, but this time the Fresnel option. Now the dots are more toward the edges, but there are still too much. Let's decrease the blend value and boom, we got the suit shader. You can see the dots are fully visible on edges of the character, adding a subdivision modifier to give some resolution to the curves. Now I will give the same material to the mask which is in his hand, with 1, 2, 3, boom. Now we will focus on his head. First, quickly give some hair shader to his hair. His hair has basic principle hair shader with black color and increased roughness. Assign the same shader to the eyebrows as well. Now we'll jump on the head shader, select the head and add a material called head. Add an image texture. Here I will import this color texture which I had painted in Substance Painter. Plug that to the color socket. I am adjusting the color map a bit. I also want some amount of subsurface scattering, so set the subsurface color to red, and set the type to random walk fixed radius, and lower the value very much. Also lower the roughness a bit. So this is the first group of shader. Let's name this skin shader. Now I will jump to the lines effect on his face. I understand that these lines are more visible in the shadow area of the face, so I need some node to have this information. Well, the closely I found is ambient occlusion node. I know it only addresses the ambient light, but it will do the job perfectly. So add the ambient occlusion node, and also add a color ramp node, and contrast it so that we get maximum amount of black shadows. Tighten it. Add a mix color node. And place it in between the connection link. Now it's time to call the line texture. Import the texture and add both of his friends. Connect the camera option. You can see this time we are seeing much more bending, but here we can easily use the window option because this is line texture, and if it get wrong ratio, it won't stretch. So now we can increase the tile size. I can see the lines are not straight on his face. There is a rotation here, so I will rotate the z-axis to 45 degrees. Now put the ambient occlusion value to the factor of the color mix node and put the line texture to the top slot. Make the bottom color fully white. We don't want this amount of darkness, so light up the black levels of the color amp node and make it gray. I am increasing the tiling more. So this is now the second group for the shader. Frame it and name it. Now we need the same dot effect in this shader also, so let's just copy that from the suit. Oh, I forgot to frame that third group. Frame it, name it, and copy it. And paste to the head shader. Here, the dot shader is looking for color information. Plug the head color here. Now I can preview the dots. Let's give me some time to organize the nodes. And now finally we will mixing the groups. Add a mix shader, plug that to material output, plug the line pattern group to the factor, and put the skin shader to the bottom. And you can add a Toon shader with black color in the top socket. I am reorganizing the nodes. Now to connect the third group, duplicate the mix shader. Add a layer weight node and connect that to the factor of the mix shader, and connect the dot group to the bottom socket. This time I have to lower the brightness of the dots. And also detach it from the emission. Now the final thing is left is the expression lines, which we had painted in Substance Painter. So add the texture. This is the line texture. Add a mix shader. Plug the main connection to the bottom socket and plug the line's texture to the factor value. If you want, you can add an emission node with black color, or whatever color you want. Now the shaders are done, we can re-enable all the other layers. Now we are in the final step, the compositing stage. For this you have to render the scene, but before rendering let's check some render passes so that we will use them later in compositing nodes. We only need the combined pass, mist pass, shadow pass, and ambient occlusion pass. Now let's give it a render. So our render is done. We can split the view and open the compositor. Here, please enable Use Nodes, and add a node which is Input Render Layer. And another node called Composite. You can also check this option called Backdrop, so that you can preview any node on the compositor background. I am usually not a fan of this, so I am disabling it for now. Actually, we will be creating the dots effect in the background objects as well, which is there in the movie as well. So firstly, we need this AO, so preview this. And add a color ramp node. Do the same which I am doing, crunching the black and whites. Flip the colors. Add a color mix here. Duplicate the color map node, plug the shadows here, and plug this color map to the factor. Flip the colors. I am again adding the color map to the connection link. You may be thinking what's the purpose of this is. I am making like a mask image for the dot texture. I have seen in the references that the dots are visible in mostly the highlighted parts of the image. Take this example here. This is the highlight part of the image, and this is the shadow part. If I can make a mask with shadow pass or ambient occlusion pass, and then with little bit of blur, I can feed it in the factor value of mix node with dot texture and original render. So that's what I am doing here. Now I get the information. Here I added a blur node and increased the value to 50 for both X and Y. Because nothing is remain in contrast, I am again adding a color map node. And push the blacks even further. So now this image has become like a mask for our dot pattern. Speaking of dots, let's call it in the compositor. Add an image node and import the dot pattern. Preview this.
Now we can mix it with mix node.
Our mask in the factor and dots are in the top socket. Let's again add a mix node, plug the main link to the bottom, and the combined pass from the render layer connect that to the top socket. Now set the blend mode to color dodge, and set this color to black. You can see the dots are in fully white color, which we don't want. I want to add the image colors to the dots. So now I am gonna add a RGB curve node in the connect link of the combine render layer pass. And crunch it down to get darkness in the image. Something like this, and now add a blur node again. Give some X and Y values. Now duplicate a mix node. Plug the blur layer to the top, and the dots texture to the factor. Oh, let's put the blur link to the bottom actually. And set the color again to black. Now you can see the dots have the colors. Now finally we can mix it with the original render. To place the mix node at the end, link the original render to the top of the mix node. And this time we will use the add blending mode. You can also decrease the size of the dots by adding a transform node in between and lower the scale value. The final last thing is remaining is an issue, where these dots are also generating on the character as well, so to fix it, we have to go to this option and click on this button and click New, and rename this to Spider-Man only. You can see we have two render layers, so let's rename the first one also. And go to the Spider-Man only render layer and disable all the layer other than Spider-Man. Let me know you that this step only works if you had checked transparent under the render setting, under the film. Now hit another render. Back on the compositor, add another render layer node, and set to Spider-Man only, and place it at the end, and add another color mix node here and take the alpha input to the factor. On the top we have out previous composition and at the bottom we can plug the original render. The last step is to add the chromatic abrasion which you can see in the film. Actually that's very simple. Just add the lens distortion node and play with the settings which you think is good. And lastly give a good color grade to the image and call it done. So this is it for this video. I hope you like it. Subscribe the channel for more. Bye.